Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Q&A with the Family Support Department at the St. Louis ARC. Today is our final installation in our month of conversations about employment because it's National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and we've saved the best for last, I think. We're going to be talking about a kind of unusual topic today, which is the caregiver and family role in supporting somebody who's going to get a job and who wants to keep a job and build their career. If you guys could introduce yourself and talk about your roles in the employment team and anything else about your journey in your own careers. So Tom, let's start with you.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm Tom Hudson. I'm one of the assistant directors in employment services. I am fortunate to be on a team with some overachievers, and we support people to identify their knowledge, skills, and abilities, and their ability to work independently out in the community. And we assist with their job search and placement as well. A little bit about me. I've been in this field for a little over 26 years. I've been with the ARC 13, and I did a tally just in case it came up at the last Q&A Taylor and I did at the beginning of the month. I've had 16 jobs since 1972. So one thing to remember is your first job usually isn't your last job.
I love that statistic. Thanks for sharing that. Would you like to share with us how many you got fired from? Just kidding.
One. I got fired from one. Yes.
All right. Well, we may circle back to that later in the conversation. Thanks, Tom. How about you, Taylor?
I'm Taylor Hartman. I am one of the other assistant directors at the St. Louis ARC. I oversee our pre-employment training program, which is for folks who are 18 and up who are wanting to brush up on their work skills. I also help oversee our social skills curriculum that's done virtually now, and our summer programs, SWEP and STEP. Tom's got me beat. I've been at the ARC for 8 years. Don't know how many jobs, I think just a handful. But yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm the dinosaur. I've had a few jobs, but almost all of them have been at the ARC since I graduated from college. So that just doesn't happen anymore. And I think it's a good thing for Tom to point out, because really the employment world has changed since I joined it. And the expectation for people to stay in the same job for extended period of time is it's not really there anymore. I think people know that there's a lot of things happening in the world, new skills developing, new interest, and there's a lot more possibility for people to move from job to job. Having said that, continuity is still good, and we're really proud at the ARC. Brian mentioned in our last Q&A that we have an average of 8 years that people stay in the jobs we find them. So hopefully that means that we're working with people to find a job that they truly love and feel really great at. So our topic today is shifting from caregiver to an advisor for your family member who's seeking a job or already working. And I want to just frame that out a little bit before I turn to Tom and Taylor. This is a topic we cover in a multi-session workshop called Joyzen, where we work with families to understand what the benefits are of them being able to step back as the decision maker for their family member and let their young adults and adult children make more decisions for themselves, stumble and fall and learn from mistakes, and more importantly than that, even I think protect themselves, because as a caregiver you have a lot of emotional connection to what happens with your child. So your ability to recognize your own fear and anxiety when something new is happening in your family member life, and to deal with it and take care of yourself can make the difference in your child's ability to step up and take responsibility for themselves. So in a nutshell, being a caregiver is somebody that does for a person. When you think about caregiving, you think about people that might bathe you, dress you, give you rides, make decisions for you. When I think about advisors, I think about people that give me information so that I can make the best decisions for myself. They may challenge challenge me about why I feel the way I do, but ultimately I'm always going to be the decision maker, whether it's a doctor, a financial advisor, or my mother, although she still tries to be a caregiver, even though I'm in my 60s at this point. So that's what we're talking about today. And I think what I'm going to do is start Tom and Taylor with sort of that trajectory of life and how parents might be able to think differently and act differently at different points in the employment spectrum. So usually we come into contact with families when their kids are teenagers, starting to think about what happens after school, maybe getting engaged with volunteerism or their first job. And I'm going to just ask each of you to kind of jump in. Taylor, maybe you can start. Where might a parent start helping their child to step forward to be the decision maker and step to the side as a parent?
You're right on it, especially from my perspective, working with our summer program, SWEP and STEP. That means that we can start supporting individuals as early as 16 years old. So those are high school individuals who are, still figuring out the whole thing of making decisions for themselves. They're getting more and more responsibility, hopefully, but definitely still in a supported situation to where they're not often totally autonomous in their decision making, and that's understandable as high school students progress throughout their high school career. But hopefully around that time, they can be given the platform to make some of those decisions autonomously. And whether that is, their morning routine and how they wake up each morning, or how they plan to start their day, or even, afternoon activities and things like that, how they're managing their chores schedule. Maybe they're able to pick and choose what responsibilities are done when. If there's that room and that platform to make safe decisions, and do so independently, I would start seeing how that can be done. It could also be something as far as, independently going to the store and picking something out that they need for groceries, or independently calling in a pizza, or doing something like that. We've talked about that in previous webinars, and it's really a crucial point, in my opinion, just as far as giving that confidence to start making decisions and doing things on their own. I think that's a great place to start. But if we're not quite there yet and we feel that we're not able to safely make those decisions, I would just say that that's something that they do with support over time. And around the time of graduation or completion of high school or VSP, whatever that might be, hopefully by that point, they're kind of more autonomous in scheduling their day to day, or, again, figuring out what decisions they can safely make, and having the opportunity to choose what their life will look like after school, when they're going to get a job, what kind of job they're going to have, because that might differ from, say, a family or caregiver's opinion or perspective. They might have thought, oh, my son or daughter, really enjoys this, so I envision them doing one thing. And then sometimes when we meet with the individual, they may or may not share that same opinion. So I think just getting those conversations flowing and welcoming new opinions and those ideas, and the freedom to explore some of that safely, starts getting people ready for knowing that in their adulthood, they're often going to be given the opportunity to make decisions and make choices. And, of course, guardianship can be a factor as well. But say in the workplace, we're often given those decisions. We're given the opportunity to make a choice or to take initiative. So we want to build upon that confidence. So we've got that skill.
Well, and I always like to remind families, even if you feel that guardianship is the right choice for your family member, that doesn't preclude that they should make as many decisions as possible for themselves, and that you should support those decisions. So I love that your examples really don't have a whole lot to do with that very first stage about the actual job. You're talking about everyday decisions and that feeling of I have enough skills and confidence that I can go into the grocery store and pick up one or two items and check out and be successful. And I think those are things that are cool, being able to use the phone. Tom, Taylor kind of led you into discovery and exploration. When you think about that first part of thinking about your dreams and aspirations for a job, and then maybe that first job, how do you go out and try out different things so that what's going to be out there. What are your thoughts about that? How can families not only have an open mind, but let their family members maybe explore things that they weren't aware were going to be out there?
Well, even before that first entry-level job is a glimmer in your child's eye, make them do chores and hold them accountable. There must be consequences. And the reason that's important is when they do get a job, they'll be well prepared to experience and manage consequences for when they make a mistake at work. If they never experience a negative consequence in their life, and then they go to work and they make a huge mistake and there are consequences, they're not going to be prepared for that. So, chores, and don't let them off the hook. Just because there's a foot of snow in the driveway doesn't mean they don't have to take down the trash. Somebody's got to do it.
What
So-
that makes me think about is kind of expectations for quality of work. That I think when we set a high bar for how well somebody does something, it lets them know that we know they can do it. And I'm thinking about when a kid cleans their room, you might start off with them just maybe clearing stuff off the floor, but you want to work towards a clean room that includes stuff being picked up, things being dusted, maybe certain areas being cleaned. There's steps along the way that can build to a really high quality level of completion.
I agree.
So, Tom, in the discovery process, have you experienced anybody that's kind of started out with this idea of that they wanted to do something and then it turned out to be that their skills and interests really pivoted?
Not that specific, but part of that discovery and exploration process, it's as much about the people we support experiencing self-discovery as it is about us discovering their knowledge, skills, and abilities. A lot of times young people we support, especially, they're not really sure what their motivation to work is. So we help them identify that. Sometimes they'll tell us out of earshot of their parents, I'm doing this because my mom and dad said I had to. Well, that's not a good motivation to work, because if it's gonna be an unpleasant experience, chances are if we do support them in finding a job, they're not going to be successful. So drilling down, asking open-ended, probing questions, leading them to draw their own conclusions about what their motivations to work are, is a big first step. And then when we're doing the exploration activities, we go out in the community and go to different businesses and do work. We're not really focused on the hard skills. We go to Schnucks and bag groceries. We can teach anyone to put a can of corn in a grocery bag. But greeting the customer, thanking the customer, taking initiative, following instructions, being organized, those transferable skills and those soft skills are the skills every one of us has to have in order to keep a job. And that's what we focus on. If people don't have solid soft skills and transferable skills, we're probably not going to recommend a job search. We'll recommend, say, pre-employment with Taylor's team so they could work on those skills, and all part of that self-discovery process I mentioned earlier. And when they do sharpen those skills, then they can come back to VR for services, and we can help them find that first job.
That's really interesting. Taylor, I want to know if you want to comment on that, because I feel like there's often a disconnect for families when their family member is saying, I really want to be a graphic artist, or I really want to be a floral designer. And we come back and say, we think a good place for you to start is at Schnucks. There is a tendency for parents, I think, to kind of rear up and become great advocates. And honestly, many people don't want to stay a bagger for the rest of their lives. But Tom mentioned this idea about generalized skills. Can you talk about that a little bit more and maybe some of your experiences with what young people have been able to learn in those kind of settings?
Absolutely. So we definitely have experience with pre-employment training that we'll have folks come in that or share with us their dream job, or share with us their job that is a few steps ahead of where we're at. And so we do have to have that realistic conversation of knowing that, since we haven't had a job yet, or maybe we haven't, held one successfully, that there's a few steps that we need to do before we can end up at that dream job. As Tom shared earlier, the jobs that we look for, the jobs that we're helping people find, one, we want it to be individualized. We want it to we want it to align with a person's needs and their interests and their skill set, because that's going to make someone successful. But also we know that it's not a forever job. So sometimes there might be a compromise in that, our dream job is a few steps from where we are, but we're going to look for more of an entry level position where we can gain skills that we can build upon that'll help us get to that next level. Another thing that's been mentioned previously is the workplace expectations and industry expectations. Our staff and, our team, we learn what that is. We understand what those expectations are. And so we're able to share that throughout the assessment phase and pre-employment, or the discovery and exploration phase on Tom's team. We're able to share some of that reality that we run into. If there's a certain stamina requirement or a pace requirement that we see, and we know that we're not quite there yet, we're going to suggest something else so we can build upon it. And that even circles back to having that expectation at home too. If we're, for example, if we're going to do housekeeping or keep up with a rec center where we're folding towels and keeping up with that laundry, then maybe have a similar expectation of those tasks at home. So we're not able to just do our tasks at our leisure at home, and that it's transferring over to what our expectation is at work. But back to the point of just kind of working and building on those skills, we know that we want to keep a person's interest and skill set in mind, but we also know we've got to start somewhere. So we might find that there is a more achievable opportunity for us to look into to build upon those skills, and know that that person can transfer those skills over to another place. That's the beauty of it. It doesn't have to be the forever job unless you want it to be. But we've got to start somewhere, because as back to the original point of this, we've all mentioned we've had several jobs. So we took with us many skills to get to where we are now. And so we kind of use that same logic that if we are not, totally at our dream job, that's okay. We're going to take with us our skills and work towards it.
I'm thinking about some of the people I know, particularly the people in their 20s that I know that have had very strong ideas about like a job in the creative arts that they wanted to have, and that they've spent several years kind of trying to pursue it. And then over the time, almost all of them have sort of branched into this two-part goal where they have the job I do for money, and the motivation is about what am I going to spend my income on, and then the other part is how am I going to fulfill my creative needs and juices, and those, so they end up having two goals. And so I think that's important to think about too. I'm not working in the job that I find the most fun to do with my free time, because I can't make enough money doing that because I'm just not that good. But I'm doing something that I feel like is really capturing my skills and talents. So, Tom, I think when you talked about motivation, that's one of the things I'd like to see parents doing is to really thinking about what is the motivation for their kid. And it's probably going to be more related to what they can do with the money than it is to be about having this fulfilling career, because I don't think most young people focus on that at that age stage.
No, when I was a teenager, my motivation to work was the money, so I could buy records, put gas in my car, things like that.
You bet.
It was, making 85 cents at McDonald's in 1972 was not a way to make a long-term life plan. One of the things that's important to remember, though, is a lot of times our first job, while it may not be our dream job, it's a very important job, because it, along with learning a work ethic from our parents, that first job is where we learn our work ethic.
Yeah, I can think of many things I learned in the first job. And I also learned that it can be fun to be at work. I mean, we had a lot of camaraderie at my first job, which was really part of the thing that I like to carry with me today. Tom, I want to shift a little bit and talk about the job career development process and how families can maybe turn over some responsibility. How do you help people do their own take responsibility for their own job search? Are there pieces that you encourage people to do on their own that they can kind of step up and fulfill?
Absolutely. When we have that initial meeting with the VR counselors, it's called a planning conference. One of the things we always say to people is, we're here to do this with you, not for you. This is a partnership. If you're looking for a personal assistant, we're not your team. So the expectation we set for people, and we also want people to set expectations for us, but let's make it more of an agreement. So the agreement we like to come to is people we support who are looking for a job should bring at least 3 job leads with them to their weekly meeting. If they don't have 3 job leads, then maybe a combination of 1 lead and 2 new ideas, or maybe 3 new ideas if they don't have any leads. But people have to have some skin in the game, or they're not, or the job they do get is not going to have any value to them. It's going to be meaningless if we do everything for the people we support.
And that includes families. So let's talk about that. Tom said the person should bring 3 job leads. So imagine your child coming home and saying, I've got to come up with 3 leads to take to my next employment meeting. What can you do other than make calls for them and give them a list of leads? How can you give them the opportunity to move forward? What are some things you would encourage families to do, Taylor and Tom?
The first thing I just wanted to say is you made a crucial point in that we're not wanting or asking anyone to make phone calls for the person we're supporting. That would counteract that independence that we're trying to foster. So, what I typically suggest is for people who are starting with pre-employment, that whenever they are in the car with their family member, if they're going to the store, they're running errands, they're sitting around the dinner table, and it's a casual conversation, brainstorm some places. Because again, the parent or that loved one might see strengths or an interest that maybe the person's not identifying yet or even thinking of. So it can definitely be helpful to brainstorm together. And it can be, as we're driving down the road, seeing what's nearby and kind of picturing what that job can look like, and maybe going into the store and observing what a role looks like now from afar, and then coming back to us and letting us know, hey, I observed this position and it seemed like I would be able to do a lot of what I saw that person doing. Through conversation, through brainstorming, I think that's the great place to start. And then that way the support staff can take it from there. We've got a lead, we've got an idea that we can go off of.
Taylor, you just said probably the most important word involved with what we do: independence. The ultimate goal of VR funded services and our pre-employment training program is to work ourselves out of a job. People we support are going to be working virtually independent out in the community. They're not going to have their job coach with them all day, every day at work. Eventually, the job coach is going to just come by a couple times a month. So teaching that independence at home is really important. And if, Billy or Sally, they're getting a little anxious about not having 3 job leads for their meeting with their career consultant tomorrow, don't just give them a lead. There's a very wide, bright line between enabling and empowering. And so make sure, that, you're empowering. Ask your children open-ended questions. Well, okay, you had 18 hours to come up with 3 job leads. How are you going to do that? Where's the first place you want to look? So lead them to draw their own conclusions and lead them to find their own resources by asking those open-ended questions.
There's two more questions that I really want to ask. And the first one is, I think we hit a lot of roadblocks once someone has a job and something's going wrong. Either the person's going home and telling their parents that they're not happy because something's happening on the job, or the employer maybe is communicating to the family or the person that something's not going well on the job. How can a parent pivot? What's their role in communication when their person is now an employee of business X?
Well, the first thing they shouldn't do is go talk to their child's supervisor. And when parents tell us they want to go meet with the employer, we ask them how they would feel when they were a teenager if their parents showed up at their job. And then they kind of rethink that, oh yeah, that's probably not such a good idea. Call your staff person, whether it's the ARC or another agency, call the job coach first. And if you can't get a hold of the job coach, call their supervisor. If you can't get a hold of the supervisor, call the career consultant who helped with their job search and placement. Then we can facilitate a remedy to overcome those barriers that are, making your child, unhappy in their job. Sometimes if, we learn maybe if they're 8, 10, 12 months into a job, maybe it's time to move on. Other times it's as simple as having a conversation. Maybe a coworker is not communicating effectively with your child, or vice versa. We can get in there, we can facilitate that conversation, and then things tend to work themselves out.
And that's such an opportunity for that employee to learn how to deal with a difficult situation, which is a skill that all of us continue to work on, I think, throughout our employment careers. I think that's so important. And I like the fact that you didn't leave families out. You've just got to get them to make sure you're aware of situations and so that you can step in and do that. And we take the same kind of triangulated communication at college with students. You communicate with your student if they're having problems in class, not with the professor, but figure out a way to link in their support system. I want to end, this is probably a terrible place to end, but I believe in the power of failure. And so I want to talk about how you all have seen failure be a positive things for people going down any point of the employment journey. Do you have a story to share, or just some comments that you'd like to make about failure?
Failure is your friend. Don't be afraid to fail, and don't be afraid to let your child fail. If we never fail, we can never succeed. Sometimes parents' goals and dreams for their children diverge greatly from what their children's goals and dreams are. Just because your children have a different idea of what their life is going to look like than you do, that's not a failure. That's an opportunity to support your children to achieve what they want in their life.
And I think everybody makes mistakes. If they don't, they're stagnant. So for me, that's a big piece of it. Taylor, anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I completely agree, and thinking of pre-employment especially, or specifically, it's a time limited program. So often that time works against us, right? And that can be one of our biggest challenges. But it's also really nice because we have definitely supported people who were really, really successful in the beginning. And we continue to provide that support as we're, we've got one foot towards opening that VR door, but then we see that something comes up that's really, really crucial to their success at work. And we're able to work out what that challenge and barrier is, so we can hopefully prevent that from happening in the future. And we've had it be at times where a person is fired from their training site, or a person makes a pretty large mistake and it's looked at as a quote unquote failure. But in the end, we're able to pivot and work through that and build upon that. And I think, as any of us here can probably speak to, from those failures, from those mistakes, it gives you a lot of, encouragement not to have that happen again. So sometimes without having that safety net, it puts us in a better spot because we're able to fall and get back up and figure out how to prevent that fall from happening again. And we see that a lot throughout pre-employment training. It's not always that linear. Here we start, here we end up successful and we move forward. It's definitely more of a zigzag. Yep.
When you do fail at work and no one's there to see it, that doesn't mean no one's going to find out. So if you make a mistake, own it. It's better to address it immediately than to try to hide it, because eventually it will catch up to you and you'll be in big trouble. So if you go to your supervisor and say, you know what, I actually dumped, let's say you're the fry person at McDonald's. I accidentally dumped out a gallon of clean fry oil and I meant to dump out a gallon of used fry oil. They're going to appreciate your honesty and your accepting responsibility for your mistake. If you try to hide that mistake, like say putting the dirty fry oil in the clean fry oil jug, that is going to land you in worse trouble down the road. So admit your mistakes, be honest, accept responsibility, and that is much easier to deal with than doing the opposite.
And I'll say it's much harder to do that than you think, because many people have been in environments where they were punished for failures. And so a lot of us try to avoid that. But the reality is, Tom's right, is if you can acknowledge when something goes wrong and talk about it honestly, 9 times out of 10, somebody's going to respect that and help you out. And if they don't, it might not be the right job match anyway. You deserve to be in a space where that's respected. So I'm going to close on that and just say thanks. This has been such a fun conversation. I love talking about this topic. Thanks, everybody.